My name is Cameron Guy, and I am looking at creating a personal reflecting on ethics, and the chosen topic that I've chosen for ethics is around euthanasia. And we'll go to the next slide. Ethics and a different perspective, which the topic is human life, euthanasia. Ethics, moral principles, honesty, integrity, and a choice and conscience. So we are going to be reflecting and having a personal reflection on human life, and the topic, ethics topic that is chosen is euthanasia. What is the meaning of life? The question is difficult to understand because it is so complex. Our answers could focus on the origins of the universe, the purposes of life, or the point of human life. The question is, what is the meaning of life? Is it better understood as asking the purpose of value of our lives? According to Genesis, people were made with a purpose, not just to be independently distinct, but also to be uniquely qualified for certain occupations. God makes it plain what he has in mind, and when he says he would create people in his image, and they will rule and reign and produce fruit. As we've got two images here, the meaning of life. I'll just share one of those. The theistic response: our lives have a purpose, a value, because they are part of the divine plan. There's other views of the meaning of life from the nihilism, which is life is constant struggle, satisfaction of needs produce only boredom and more struggle. So I'll go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Christian ethics. Christian ethics, which aspires to love God and neighbour in every moral and ethical issue, is governed by God's revelation in Scripture rather than by other systems of thought. Christians nowadays must deal with a substantial number of real-world ethical problems. For example, the legislation of abortion, same-sex marriage are the two current issues in the several societies. Some topics like general sexual issues or the basis of war, self-defense, are more universal and enduring. Sometimes God has spoken plainly and explicitly on moral matters such as don't steal. But there are other subjects that the Bible could not have openly addressed. Issues that require contemporary technology, like genetic engineering, vitro fertilization, and even when the Bible does not address the topic directly, there are biblical principles that can be relied upon to establish the accurate moral assessment. The study of ethics begins with a critical reflection on the way of life. Christian ethics has its roots in the work of a Hebrew prophet who called people to renew their covenant with God by living with justice, kindness, and humility. It grows from the teaching of Jesus, who taught love of God and neighbour. Christian ethics also closely connected with another tradition of critical reflection that begins with the Greek philosopher and asked what it is that everybody is seeking. Thus, Christian thinking is about ethics, develops as a shared human questions, find specific Christian answers. The topic that, as I said, is the ethics topic that I'm looking at is euthanasia. The word euthanasia is derived from the Greek word EU, which is good. And the thanatos, which is death. And therefore, people sometimes understand it to mean good health, good death, good death, a rather misleading and understanding of that term. This practice occasionally referred to as mercy killing. The word that is inaccurate in how it portrays such an action. Euthanasia is simply the intentionally taking of life from an elderly person or somebody that is terminally sick person or someone who has an incurable illness or injury. Patient-centered deontology is a theory that it is rights-based rather than duty-based. Yet it still is deontology in the one must analyse the act itself and not the consequences to determine its righteousness, rightness. So to determine what is right and what is wrong, so determine its rightness. Humans have inherent right not to be used by another for the user's benefit, and this sect of deontology can call upon Immanuel Kant's principle of autonomy to justify the claim that humans must never be used as a mere means to another's ends. Additionally, he contended that the act of euthanasia may be better in a situation where the choice has been made to the end prolonged suffering, since it prevents terrible and torturous pain that would result from letting someone go. It is important to note the passive justification for euthanasia. The legal system also supports the idea that passive euthanasia is morally more acceptable than the active euthanasia. I am utilising the person's defence to demonstrate that the distinction between the active and the passive euthanasia is unpersuasive. If, as Rachel claimed, that both active and passive euthanasia involved an action, and if the patient of the deontology ethical framework is being applied, then the agent is what should be examined, and there is certain whether the euthanasia is morally acceptable. Although the controversial and often criticised, the distinction between passive and active euthanasia nevertheless has some intuitive appeal. When a patient is permitted to pass away, natural seems to be just doing what it must. So nature seems to be doing just what it must. Euthanasia is increasingly advocated in public discourse as a humane response to terminal prognosis and distress. On the part of the patient and their carers, emotive arguments and challenging the established ethics and forbids doctors prematurely ending human life. Utilitarian thinking, emphasising the autonomy and the pragmatism, may resonate with doctors who wish to do their best for their patients. Dying with dignity is not simply a matter of the aesthetics. Dignity is intrinsic human quality, respect for the living person, even when the quality of life blamably is low. The law is subject to the winds of change, and the code of ethics, especially when venerable, ought to be more durable. The impact of the ethics of euthanasia that has impacted on my life is to reflect on the creation and life and the question of the person's right to die and not to suffer. The relevancy to the euthanasia and Edward de Bono that the six hat theory allows us to think more efficiently and productively. The six thinking hats are designed to help you organise your brain in a much more effective way that allow you to pull apart the tangle in the normal thinking and sort into six self-contained strands to improve the efficiency of thinking process and transforms it into a collaborative effort rather than an argument. Using Edward de Bono's 6 hat theories as a metaphor represents the 6 different cognitive approaches to an understanding an issue or a problem. In the metaphor, the 6 hats are coloured black, blue, green, red, white, and yellow. Each hat represents a different logical and philosophical approach to critical thinking about the problem. The reason that I mention Edward de Bono is for the purpose of euthanasia, and the ethical framework surrounded many debates of what is right and wrong. In the case of my wife's mother dying in hospital, there was a need to put on the different hats because a doctor's understanding, which the doctors have a duty to protect the patient, the doctor has a duty. So because of the doctor's understanding the specific case in the bioethics, which the 4 basic bioethical principles are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. The whole situation of my wife's mother dying in hospital and the ethical framework and the argument for against euthanasia is complicated, as in these circumstances there was no chance of life, and that the wife's husband had agreed the best course of action was to let his wife pass away and not to suffer anymore. Due to the doctor's understanding and the sense of duty to keep his wife alive. And this is where you have the question of also the deontology, the patient-centered deontology. It is about the patient's rights. It is about, in this case, the husband making the right decision for his wife not to suffer anymore. Pastors must know that they're obliged to exercise careful discernment of the situations. The degree of responsibility is not equal in all cases, and the factors may exist which limit the ability to decide. While clearly stating that church teachers and pastors are to avoid judgment, they do not consider the complexity or the various situation. Pastoring the dying and the mourning is challenging, sobering, and rewarding. It is challenging because we need great wisdom to know how to respond to people's needs. And it is sobering because we can stand by our parishioners as they cross that threshold of time in eternity and read the Word of God for wisdom and understanding. Is there a right way or a wrong way to care for others? And why is ethics so important for healthcare professionals? Healthcare professionals must always consider what is morally proper action to take into the situation when providing care. Of course, straightforward response to the question, this is a complex, is uncommon. There are many ethical perspectives available to healthcare professionals, of all which illuminate very ethical caregiving strategies. We start with the strategy that students in our health and social care management in the degree is likely already be aware of the deontology. A moral choice in deontology is not really a choice. Instead, morals are deduced using the intellect, and essentially, if we all thought carefully, we'd come to the same conclusion. In healthcare, this could simply mean harm is unacceptable, irrespective of its consequences. Immanuel Kant is a German philosopher and is credited with developing deontology ethics. This area of philosophy connects the moral judgment with the logic. Ethical judgment should be guided by logical reason. It is accurate to say that all patient-centered deontology theories are based on the rights of the individual. A representative version proposes the right against being used solely for the tool to achieve the positive results without one's consent as its fundamental principle. Such a fundamental right should not be confused with the other. More specific rights such as prohibition or intentionally or unintentionally killing, and it protects the user from being used by another for their own or other people's gains. The variation of patient-centered deontology ideas particularly forbids the exploiting another person's body, labour, talents without the person's permission. The beneficee is the basis of caring ethics. The best interests of the patient remains more important than the self-interest. Patient-centered care. The non-maleficence is the avoidance of harm or hurt, nurse balance the risk and the benefits of care while striving to avoid harm. So the beneficence, the healthcare team is required by its concept to contribute to the patient's welfare and interventions that directly benefit the patient. However, the patient may experience benefits that go beyond those related to health outcomes. The patient's attitude, beliefs, and culture may alter how the benefit is viewed. For instance, a patient may determine that certain therapy is ineffective because of the residue or morbidity that results in the intolerable, prevents the living a good life. When patients has the ability to communicate how their values affect their preference for medical treatment, this is easier to understand. The obligation to not harm someone arises from the non-maleficence principle. If harm can be prevented, it should be reduced. As a result, the advantages of the intervention should outweigh its dangers and potentially for the unintended suffering. And here we have the principles biomedical ethics, the autonomy, the respect for the person. We've mentioned before the beneficence, the obligation to contribute to the person's welfare, the non-maleficence, the obligation not to inflict harm on the other person, and justice is for the healthcare. This is a distribution of health and healthcare is fair and equitable. So these are the four principles that we see there of the principles biomedical ethics. This is the bibliography. Thank you for listening to this personal reflection. And thank you for listening. My name is Cameron Guy, and thank you for listening.